Hi everyone. This video will go into Bubble's API connector and how to set up authentication for API calls. As an overview, authentication is simply the process of verifying who someone is, and some APIs require this so that they can understand if the client is actually allowed to access this API and what kind of information they're allowed to access. Now, I'm going to go to the News API and explain how to set up authentication using this API. I'm on this URL page here, and I'm on the documentation. Whenever I access any kind of API documentation, I always want to check if there's authentication required. Now I can see here that authentication is required for this News API. As an overview, the News API allows me to receive a list of top news breaking headlines from various news outlets across the world. To authenticate and use this API, I just need to provide a simple API key. And I can provide this in one of three ways: via the query string parameter, so appending this API key to this, or via the HTTP header in two different formats. On the right-hand side, I can see an actual example of how this is set up. And the first one that I'm going to show is how to set this up via the query string. I can see here that the method that is used is a get API method. Now let me copy this example URL and go through the process of setting up the API connection. I'll switch tabs here and I'll click Add another API. I'll add in News API, and then I'll add in everything, which is the endpoint, and I'll paste this in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pop the query string parameters in as parameters in this section. If you're a little uncertain or a little confused as to what a query string parameter is, this was covered in our previous video, and I'd recommend referring to this. Before providing the API key, I'll first initialize the call without it and see what the response is. I receive a status code 401 giving me an error saying my API key is missing. Now, if I add the API key, and I initialize the call, I can see that the status is okay and that I've now received the API response. I can save this information. Now, on top of this, there's another way of authenticating that Bubble natively handles in the API connector. If I go to this section and I look at this dropdown, there's various ways that are supported, or various standard authentication methods that are supported, and one of which is private key in the URL, which is what I'm doing so here. For here, I can see that there's a key name, a key value, and a development key value. I can update the key name to API key, as this is what is required for this API. I can then copy this and paste this here. Now let me reinitialize this call. I can see that this call still works. So now, why would I use this particular method of authenticating versus using the add parameters? Now, I would always recommend using this private key in the URL if possible, because what it allows me to do is to split the key values into the live key value here and the development key value here. This is incredibly useful when I'm doing testing in the development or the live environment. If I'm simply using a parameter, I need to update the API key that I copy and paste into here for when I'm testing in the development environment and when I'm testing in the live environment. Whereas here, this is automatically split up for me, and it makes my life easier so that I don't need to push a new update to live or swap out those API keys whenever I'm doing testing. So that's why I'd always recommend using this particular method. Next, what I want to do is to show how to set up authentication by providing a private key via the header option. If I switch back to the documentation tab here, I can see that this is supported in this particular API via two options, which are listed here. I'm going to select this third option to set up. And what I need to do is via the header, I need to set up the key of authorization and then the API key value itself. So let me set this up in the connector. So I'll copy this one. I'll switch back to here. What I'll do is I'll remove this and remove this. I'll add a header. I'll add the key as authorization. I'll add the value as the API key that we have here. And let me reinitialize this call. And I can see that it is working and we've been authenticated. Bubble also has a natively supported authentication method here of private key in the header. So if I select this option, I can update the key to name to be authorization here. and the API key is a value that's here. And if I initialize that call, I can see that it is working. Again, I would always recommend using the natively supported authentication method here of private key in the header, because it does split up that live key and the development key. And if these API keys are different, it saves me a lot of hassle and time by providing that split here automatically instead of me constantly switching the value out here. Now, as you can see in this documentation, there is that split between providing the API key as a query string parameter or as a HTTP header. If you have these two options, I'd always recommend providing the API key via the header. The reason why is that when you provide information via the header, it's encrypted. Whereas when you provide it via the query string parameter, it is not always encrypted, which means that it could be stolen or could be shared. And we don't want that to occur. So if you have that option, always choose the header, as it's a safer way to share your API key with the API that you're attempting to connect to. Thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions or feedback you would like to provide, please leave a comment on the video.